Chapter 111. Legendary Ascended Super Saiyan. From afar, a small point on a comet could be seen glowing in a green hue. If one came closer, a figure could be seen hovering cross-legged just above the ground of the speeding comet. The figure had green hair, and his bulging muscles were going from tense to relaxed couple of times per second. Of course, this figure was Broly, who chose this speeding comet as his meditation location. His eyes were slightly trembling as if he was in a struggle. From time to time his ki was flaring up, expanding the already big crater around him. He was destroying the ground with his mere ki leakage. Obviously, that wasn't something new. Even normal Super Saiyans would be able to destroy the ground with their ki, but that was actually a problem. A problem Broly was trying to fix right now. It wasn't something life-threatening but a performance issue. Even ascended Super Saiyans like Kana and Aaliyah were able to transform without causing a calamity. Even Aiz and Taro were able to control their ki in that way. Yes, their control was relatively better than Broly's. It had something to do that his ki was more potent, be it its strength or nature. It was a level harder for him to reach the same control as they have now. If he were a regular Super Saiyan, Broly was confident that he would have already achieved Super Saiyan 3, even though he wasn't sure if his strength would be greater than now. It has been a year since he began to hover in this position. After many months he had reached a level where he won't destroy his surroundings anymore while transforming, and there had been glimpses of a breakthrough, but he was missing something. It wasn't the amount of accumulative ki, since his ki was by far enough to break through to a legendary Ascended Super Saiyan, LSSJ2. He knew that some could ascend beyond Super Saiyan by relying on their emotional energy, but Broly knew that Aaliyah and Kana weren't using it. They used this tingly feeling on their back to easily reach this form. Even if Broly knew the methods, training, emotional upheaval, a desperate need, or the tingly feeling, he couldn't ascend, and it started to piss him off. He was only a hair's breadth away. He could practically feel it. He started to think about how Kale achieved her legendary Super Saiyan 2. Her form was essentially a compressed version of her usual Berserk form, but that was her. Kale was after all from another universe. They had progressed differently throughout the ages, but still, he knew after hearing about the curse that even though there are probably differences, they both were still legendary Super Saiyans. There had to be more similarities than differences. It was entirely possible that by compressing his own body to a smaller form he could achieve the next level as well, but he was hesitating. He knew that even with his 3-meter-tall physique there were no losses in terms of speed, strength, or energy costs. If he now compressed his body, he may become stronger all around, but he would lose his reach. One may consider the fact of reach as unimportant, but in a high-level battle where the contestants were on the same level, the one with a longer striking range would most likely win. Obviously, if one became so large that one had trouble to hit his opponent due to the height difference, it would be more of a disadvantage, but 3 meters wasn't in that category yet. Obviously, there are some beings that won't reach 1 meter, making his height disadvantageous, but those were less likely to meet, considering the heights of the ones that would take part in the Tournament of Power. From that, Broly estimated that the general elite should be at least taller than 1 meter. One might also argue that with ki blades and blasts, one could make this difference of reach negligible, but Broly didn't want to miss out on something that could raise his stakes by a small margin, even if that margin was less than 1%. He was contemplating now if it was truly worth it. Broly relaxed his body after thinking about it for a long time and coming to a conclusion. He knew that he wouldn't be losing his advantage, but merely reducing it a bit. It was rather unfavorable to delay his evolution and progress because he was too stubborn to let go of minor advantages. Sometimes it was more appropriate to be flexible and open-minded to changes. With that thought in mind, Broly placed his feet firmly on the comet. Broly stretched his hands above his hands. His whole body started to glow as his ki started rising. Strangely, there wasn't any indication of the violent energy like in the past. He only started glowing brighter by the second until his features couldn't be identified anymore. In an instant, he pulled his arms down as if he was showing of his biceps, while the light trembled all around him. From outside, one could only see a figure that was covered by a green layer of light that was slowly shrinking in size from its initial 3-meter height. Arc Reira. A low beast-like roar out of ki rattled the whole comet Broly was standing on. A second later the light intensifies like an explosion. And like an explosion the speeding comet was blown up into thousands of debris which shot away like lightning. The shockwave pushed everything back. Even light seemed to be deflected by the high energy output. Space trembled. It looked like rips in the fabric of space would appear any second. It took a few minutes until space went back to its normal order, and light was able to reach the place a figure was floating in space. A 2.5-meter-tall figure with spiky hair that rose completely to a point and glowed slightly green. Green lighting appeared all around his body. Broly floated in space with closed eyes as he felt the changes of his body. If one would have described his body as a balloon before, it would be more of a steel ball now. The difference was immense. His skin's toughness had risen to a completely different level. He could feel that his strength and ki were twice as strong as his maximum output in his normal legendary state, But that was just his benefits of his Super Saiyan transformation. The compression had brought him other benefits that he wouldn't have imagined before. He could feel the explosiveness of his strength increased tremendously. He felt like he could instantly reach his fastest speed in an instant, which meant that his acceleration had risen by far more than twice like he anticipated beforehand. He wasn't even sure himself what his current compatibilities were. Of course, the greatest gain was the toughness of his body. His resilience, his overall defense rose terrifyingly. The only downside to this form was the high energy expenditure to maintain this form. In his normal legendary state, he could basically stay in it indefinitely because he could recover more energy than he used. Of course, that was only if he wasn't recklessly spending it. Now on the other hand, the maintenance was high as he needed energy to compress his body. The expenditure was so high, he wouldn't be able to maintain it for more than 10 minutes, and that was if he didn't move at all like he did now. Obviously, this was because he wasn't used to this form yet. He would need to get used to it until it was second nature to transform to this form. For the next 8 minutes he felt his body by flexing every muscle he could and make himself familiar to this form. He finally reverted back and started to calm down again. He could feel his body arch. It certainly took its toll on his body. He was exhausted. Good thing he expected this and didn't use up all his energy right then. After all, he was without backup deep in the universe floating in space. He thought it was time to go back, and look how they went with the base building. He put 2 fingers on his temple and searched for his planet. He had traveled far to find this comet, so it took him a second before localizing it. In the next moment he disappeared and re-emerged thousands of light years away above his planet. He looked down and saw a giant city reaching inside the jungle. It looked like the city was a combined effort of nature and civilization. Broly knew this wasn't the result of only the elves and Saiyans. Chapter 112, Galactic Patrol as Guards. Broly saw the bustling city and started falling to the ground. He quickly approached the planet, directly into the center of the city, where a tall skyscraper was built that looked like its designer came straight from the future. On his way he saw a few lights of ki in the aura. Seems like some people tried to catch him mid-flight. He was pleased by the reaction as it showed that they already thought about invaders and have a protection model to respond accordingly. Of course, Broly wouldn't slow down to be stopped by some random stranger that didn't seem to be Saiyans but belonged to the Galactic Patrol instead. Before the guards could reach him, he disappeared from their view. The guards were shocked by the sudden disappearance of a suspicion figure. They knew that if someone could just disappear like that, they probably wouldn't stand a chance against them. So, before they wasted time to search around or deny their incompetence of not letting anyone uninvited into the city of Saiyans, they directly send a distress signal. Although they didn't think that anyone would be dumb enough to mess with a whole city of battle-craving Saiyans, they didn't want to take any chances, since this alliance was accepted and missions for it was issued by the Galactic King himself. The branch that was stationed on this planet and were now in charge of the protection immediately received the signal and sent a response team while informing Lord Daz, who was their go-to person for any kind of troubles they got. Daz got the signal, and without hesitation he sent out a response team of 5 veteran Saiyans that could be considered as formidable. Their strength hovered around the first million, which was impressive since they were old-schooled. Like any other Saiyan of the old times when Vegeta was still their king, they had trouble in learning the new ways of ki cultivation and had mostly hard times cultivating. Of course, the new generation of Perditus had already surpassed most of the old veterans, but they were still inexperienced, and in such a delicate time of their building their foundation for a universal empire, Daz had to rely on experienced fighters. Besides, the numbers of the new generation were still low, and if the veterans couldn't deal with them, they probably couldn't as well. If that happened, they would need a Super Saiyan to take care of the problem. As he quickly explained the situation to these veterans, a low laughter could be heard throughout the city. The ground vibrated because of it. Ha 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 ha, your king has returned. A deep voice full of strength resounded through the streets and even went through the walls and windows of buildings. It didn't matter if the rooms were soundproof as the voice was filled with ki. It reached every person in the city. A moment later some Saiyans started going out on the streets while cheering. It snowballed until the whole city seemed to become more alive as it was already, and the streets were filled with cheers and clapping. Although for the last year they had 4 Super Saiyans to rely on, after seeing that it took their king to take actions against the elves, they became increasingly aware of their weakness. If even a Super Saiyan had struggled to gain supremacy on this planet, what about them? Weren't they basically just cannon fodder? With this in mind and coupled with their arrogant, brutal, and power-seeking nature, they started to train even more frantic than before. It was only natural that many of them were relieved that their pillar came back. That didn't mean that their motivation disappeared. Only personal strength would be worth fighting for. That was the mentality of many Saiyans. This, as a contrast to their war-starting tendencies, was being promoted and supported even with the new generation. This was what Broly wanted. Saiyans that didn't go around and start wars but still want the power, the strength to crush their enemies. He didn't want heartless war machines but warriors that grew increasingly powerful with time. It was a difficult step for the Saiyans, but that is why Broly gained the support of the Galactic Patrol. The Galactic Patrol was able to send difficult missions their way, while Saiyans were able to go after their thirst for action and battle. It was a win-win situation. Of course, if a Saiyan made mistakes, he wouldn't be judged by the Galactic Patrol but by their own people. That was the deal Broly made with the Galactic King. Since it wasn't publicly stated that he was away, it caused a bit of confusion among the Galactic Patrol, but they were quickly informed that they didn't have to search for the person that just entered this city, since that was the Saiyans King. While the Galactic Patrol was relieved, the elves were too. Since it wasn't announced that Broly left, it made the elves uneasy. They were subjugated and tasked by King Broly. They had a purpose when they followed Broly, but they felt unsure about someone else giving them commands. Many of the generals of the elves were especially relieved. Their thought process was simple and reflected the thought of many elves. Since Broly was strong and had evidentially the technology, he could have enslaved them easily, but he didn't, which meant that his intentions were genuine. Many even gave their all in moving up the ranks after seeing a few generals rising up the ladder of success. Of course, this was all steered by some Saiyans Broly had placed in administrative positions. It seemed like they were doing a good job, Broly thought as he let his gaze wander around from the highest building. After a moment of enjoying the sight and noise of a modern city, he saw a few figures flying straight towards him. He smiled as he saw that. Kana, Zangya, and Taro were rushing towards him. Their speed was creating fast winds, but the materials used to build this city were tough and wouldn't easily break. Obviously, the materials weren't on the levels of Kachin. It was still enough to sustain the stray energy of someone with Frisia's power and lower. Broly, finally, you are back. Kana was crashing straight against him. He just let her and Zangya, who was just behind Kana, hug him. After they let him go, he gave Taro a hug too before they headed towards his villa that was isolated a bit off in the center of the city. There were some guards that could be seen outside of it. The villa looked like a modern villa with its white stones and the many windows. It made a very open feeling without revealing everything inside. Broly could already tell the basic structure from what he was sensing. He also wondered why he would need a gigantic pool in his backyard. They went inside and headed towards a room with a long wooden table. Broly could tell it was incredibly sturdy. He sat down at the head, and before he could ask about the situations, a robot came inside with trays of food to be served. One after the other robot came and delivered food for the Saiyans. Now that he saw the food, his belly was announcing itself with a loud growl. He had, after all, not eaten for an entire year. For Saiyans, that would be akin to torture, and after his breakthrough, he indeed became frighteningly hungry. After having a hearty meal, they rested a bit before talking about the general progress about this planet. The city was already built to a degree that they could almost welcome the many different races from Perditus. The first to arrive would be Zinjo and the other Myrmidons. Obviously, with the growth they want to achieve in the future, they couldn't just gather all the races on this planet alone. They talked about a bit for a few hours and made several plans until they came to a conclusion. The higher-ups and the more important families of the races would be living on this planet. It would be kind of a symbol of their influence, as it would be the center for making important decisions. As for the rest of the races, every individual race with the cooperation of Saiyans would be going to other planets without any civilization and conquer it. Every race from Perditus that would be joining them now would be getting their own planet to govern. If they became leaders of other races, they solely would be responsible for them. It was a very lax reign on Broly's side, as they could essentially do what they want if it wasn't disadvantageous for Broly. Of course, if Broly called for their service, they would have to comply. It was a very raw system for now, but Broly only wanted to give a general direction and use this empire for his convenience. He wouldn't waste time to plan out the details like laws. For this, he had subordinates to do it for him. Chapter 113, Expanding Influence. After they were done talking about the alliances Broly's empire would have, the door swung open. Aaliyah and Ace came inside. Aaliyah was practically sprinting as she threw herself into Broly's arms. It was probably the longest the girls and Broly were apart after their journey towards Earth. Aaliyah was pouting a bit as he was longer away than expected. He said that the time he would be away would be ranging from weeks to months, but now he had been away a whole year without contact instead. Long time, no see. Ace said after Aaliyah let him go for a second. Broly raised an eyebrow as he looked at Ace. Broly stood up and patted Ace's shoulders with his hands, seemingly praising him. Not bad. You almost surpassed Taro, Broly said smilingly. He shot a glance at Taro and shook his head. Taro, you have to step up your game if you want to maintain your position as the third strongest. Taro started groaning. I train almost every second if I have the time. Ace only trains like once per day, and his progress is still far above mine. That's because you don't listen to Broly's advices. He already told you to make a training plan, to write down your weights, reps, sets, and pauses. If you don't keep track on how high your volume of your exercise is when you train, you won't know when and what to raise in intensity. Your physical strength obviously won't be growing as much as mine. Ace said matter of fact while Broly was just nodding his head. Indeed, train with brain, then it will maximize your results. The girls were smiling. They have always trained with Broly, so everything he advised would be absorbed by them. Hey Broly, I wanted to ask this when you arrived, but did you make some progress with your breakthrough? Taro asked as he and everyone else were aware that Broly had a hard time reaching the next level, even though he was the one that taught them how to. Broly only grinned as a response. Afterwards, Aaliyah and Ace talked about the elves in the valley. In the beginning, the two were stationed there to keep watch over the elves, but after a while, it became clear that they had no intentions to rebel. Of course, there were some individuals who acted up but were quickly suppressed and judged for their crimes. The two were very active public figures who were fair to everyone, which garnered the elves' trust and admiration. It didn't take long for them to become very popular. As a result, Ace had many women woo him. This wasn't only true among the elves but the Saiyans as well, considering that he was always serious and focused more on training the next generation and on his job. Aaliyah, on the other hand, had many admirers from both genders, but most didn't dare to approach her as she was the king's wife. Taro also joked about how Ace was practically swarmed, but after he fell for an elvish woman, he himself was denied. Broly was surprised that Ace had someone he pursued. He was after all a workaholic who always did his best on the job. Nevertheless, he wished Ace the best luck for his endeavors. Taro wasn't in a different situation, but he had only Vara the succubus in his mind. After he learned the teleportation technique Kai, he had visited her almost every single day on their spaceship. This was also what he meant that he spent every second training when he had the time. When he was not training, he spent most of his time with her, which was also a reason why his progress had declined a bit as well, besides his ineffective training methods. Although Broly always wanted them to push harder and further, he knew that a mental and emotional balance was as important. If he forced Taro to train more, the result would probably worse. Besides, Broly was guilty of the same thing in the beginning of his relationship. He had found a balance by assigning days for each of them now, but he was quite unrestrained in the beginning. Speaking of which, he could feel the lust-filled glares on his body from his wives. He stood up and started to shoo out the now unwanted male guests out of his villa. All right, I think I will rest early today. How about we continue our chats, Tomo Dash? He looked back at his wives who were gripping their own clothes and were biting their lips as they followed his every action with their eyes. In a week, we will discuss more in a week. After he closed the door after shoving Daz, Taro and Ace out, he heard the sound of cloth being torn apart. Without being able to turn around, he was quickly dragged upstairs and was thrown on the bed. He was being pressed down by several arms who were caressing every corner of his body. 2 months later, the forces on Exausia had already started to go out on missions for the Galactic Patrol. Broly had baptized this planet Exausia because it stood for power. Be it physical, mental, or the power to rule, Broly had it all and would strive for more as he went further down his path. The Saiyans were mostly tasked with elimination, capturing, or escorting missions. The average Saiyan was after all very able, even among the vast cosmos. With their strength, they quickly defeated and arrested or killed many criminals, making Saiyans a topic many started to talk about again. In the meantime, some elves were tasked with saving races from ecological disasters as they very attuned with nature. It didn't seem like their connection was something that was restricted to their own planet. This caused them to be of major help on many planets, which caused them to be admired by the normal, non-combatant races. All in all, the newly emerging Exausia forces were seen as a blessing for most. Although there were some who were still skeptical of Saiyans, after seeing them accompanied by the Galactic Patrol, the fear shrank by a large margin. Be it elves or Saiyans, they were all wearing the same uniform with an alpha symbol on their chest. Taro had asked Broly about it. Broly only answered that it was so elves and Saiyans would feel more solidary. They have already accepted each other, but the elves still felt that they were less worth than Saiyans. This now was to show them that they were treated the same and belonged to the same force. While the Saiyans were more active in the Milky Way, so was Cooler's force. After all this time, they had already gobbled up the remaining forces from Frisia and Cold. They were now by far the strongest force in the whole galaxy. Additionally, with the actions of the combined efforts of the Galactic Patrol and Exausia forces, many criminal organization and lone criminals felt pressured. It looked bad for them as more and more were being arrested, or even killed. Many felt like they had to join a bigger organization that could withstand the pressure of the Galactic Patrol. Many were inclined to join Cooler's forces, and many did. In a short time of 2 months, the old balance between the many criminal organizations tilted. Cooler's forces became stronger with every criminal the Galactic Patrol were arresting as more would join their side. Cooler's force by now was the strongest in the whole galaxy, and Cooler could be seen as the sole emperor if it weren't for the patrol. The two sides clashed numerous times, but it limited itself towards the lower ranks. Although there were many fights, no Super Saiyan or the Cooler's armored squadron had shown themselves. Of course, no one knew that for Broly both of these forces were just his pawns to further his empire. With the Galactic Patrol, many were inclined to trade and cooperate with him. Of course, there were still many races that were hostile towards Saiyans, but their opinion was quickly swayed after being saved by them from Cooler's force. Their reputation started to rise in the galaxy, but that was obviously not enough for Broly. Cooler's forces had started to reach out to the underground side of other galaxies, and it seemed like Cooler would be helping them out to eradicate the Galactic Patrol equivalent in their particular galaxy. Of course, as righteous as Broly was, he would send his forces to help them out. Chapter 114, Saiyan and Cena. So, this is King Broly. He certainly looks tough. A thin blue humanoid alien with a horn on his forehead looked at the screen which showed how Broly landed on the roof of a skyscraper. The alien was sitting in a spaceship on one of Exaustia's moons. No matter how strong he is, he will be a cold corpse after you are done with him. A feminine voice hissed out. A green-scaled slender humanoid came into the room. There were signs of some womanly curves like many female aliens in the universe had in common. She looked like a humanoid snake with her eyes resembling black marbles. Hee. True. We will proceed as usual. Since he can teleport, keep tabs on their communication. Sooner or later those idiots will offer us the perfect opportunity. Obviously, she said while her thin tongue came slithering out. Oh, King Broly, you and the Galactic Patrol should have stayed in your territory. I wish to know everything about legendary Super Saiyans. Thy wish is easy. Purunga's eyes started glowing for a second, while Broly shut his eyes as he absorbed the information that was currently invading his brain. Thy wishes have been fulfilled. Farewell. Purunga's body started disappearing, after which the Dragon Balls started rising into the sky before dispersing in every cardinal direction. That's it. Broly mumbled as he looked at his palm. Shortly after he had returned to Exausia, he went towards New Namek and made a few wishes. He had wished for intel of the top 100 strongest beings in this universe, and he became quite excited after knowing some of their capabilities. There were some who were only listed with vague information or rumors since Purunga wasn't strong enough to just analyze their powers without their permission. He also wished for a device that could redirect his energy back to himself. It was able to redirect 40% of his energy back to him, suppressing another 40% of his power. It was a way to suppress his power to 20%, but he didn't do this just to limit himself. It was another way to train himself in the higher forms. If he would have transformed to a legendary ascended Super Saiyan on Exausia, he would have caused a catastrophe on his own planet. Now he was able to go all out without worrying to cause major damages. He could also reduce the amount it redirected, making it so he could get a feel on controlling his ki step by step when being used in his higher forms. From time to time, he could lessen the amount it redirected until he achieved perfect mastery of his new form. As for the knowledge he gained from his last wish, it was underwhelming. He only got to know of many Saiyans in the past that were either just labeled as such, or were like him. Essentially, legendary Super Saiyans were just mutant Saiyans born with the characteristic to naturally generate ki. There was no mystery or secret, at least Purunga didn't inform him of any possibilities. Whether it was because he was too weak, or there was just nothing. A bit more interesting for Broly was the fact that Yamoshi was indeed the origin of this legend and of the legend of the Super Saiyan God, since he was not only a legendary Super Saiyan, but also became a god later on. After Yamoshi and a civil war, someone like Broly would be a legendary Saiyan, but in the times of Yamoshi and before him, Broly would be just considered a stronger Saiyan. This caused Broly to question how strong those Saiyans in the times of Yamoshi were exactly. He shook his head and didn't think about it anymore. He teleported back to Exausia. He emerged in his bedroom and quickly went into a trainings room. He closed the door and quickly put on a golden necklace that looked like the one from the original Broly's outfit. He himself had worn this ornament numerous times in the past, of course without its suppressing abilities. He turned into his legendary state. He directly felt how part of his power was being channeled through the necklace, which was immediately redirected and suppressed another part of his power. He put the amount being redirected to its maximum, leaving him with 20% of his power. Afterwards, he turned into his ascended state and focused on using this state more efficiently. While Broly was training, Daz was given notice that a new top patroller that was being assigned to work with them. It was someone that had fought Broly before. It was a patroller that had made some mistakes and was being punished to guard duty. He had confronted Broly and was now stationed here as a way to apologize for his past actions. An image was being transferred to him, which showed a blue face with a horn on his forehead. In the report he got, this patroller was being sent with his assistant, a female that resembled a snake. Without giving it much thought, to Daz, it didn't matter which patroller he was working with. This was after all their territory. No matter who it was, they had to humble himself on Saiyan ground. On the landing platform from the Galactic Patrol, the one assigned to cooperate with the Saiyans was waiting for Krino to take over his position. He was actually fortunate that someone else had to work in his stead. It wasn't that the Saiyans were hostile or anything. The opposite was true, actually. It was quite enjoyable, especially since the elves were beautiful to say the least, and the female Saiyans were quite the eye candy as well, but the mere thought that almost everyone he saw could instantly kill him kept his joy limited. He looked at a spaceship quickly landing. A moment after landing, two figures he had never seen before stepped outside. They wore the armor of the Galactic Patrol, but there weren't any schedules for backup or returning patrollers. He immediately approached them with a few others in tow. Which station do you belong to, and why are you here? Hey, I am Krino's replacement for now. He met with a small accident on the way and is unable to get here for now. I am here until Krino arrives. Why wasn't I informed of this? I don't know, sir. Oh, right, you probably need our identity cards. He inspected the identity cards and scanned it with his device. Strangely, it stayed red for a while until it turned green, confirming his identity as a patroller. Suddenly, he was sent a message that confirmed the whole situation by saying that another patroller would be the replacement for the next few months. Since he got all the paperwork he needed, he began to show around the newcomer and his assistant. And if you need to speak with a higher-up from the Exausia force, you have to talk with Lord Daz. You can find him in District B in the building C32. Alright, this would be all. If you need to know anything, just ask the other patrollers. They are already here for a while. Understood. Ahem. Is it possible to meet their king? I have heard how he just walked into the Galactic King's office and wanted to meet someone like him in person. Ha ha ha. Good luck with that. I have been here for 2 months and was never able to meet him. Maybe if you ask Daz, he may be able to arrange a meeting. If that is all, Officer Sin, I'm going on vacation now. Everything fantastic. Saiyan and his partner Sina looked at each other before grinning. Count your days, Broly. Broly was unaware of what was conspiring as he carefully trained every day to master his ascended form. Chapter 115. Assassination. A few days later, Broly was training under high gravity. Incoming call. An emotionless voice sounded out. Accept. Broly answered without stopping his basic body workout. Hey Broly, Daz here. What's up? Sorry to bother you, but the new galactic patroller, Krino, now in charge of this branch, had asked me if he and his assistant can meet you. Meet me? Why? He said that he prevented you from seeing their king when you visited. He wanted to apologize for his actions. Oh, that fellow. Tomorrow morning in the throne room after that, General. In the very center of the city was a palace built with a throne room. The palace was meant to be his public residence, but he at most used the throne room for official business. The villa he was currently residing in was only for him and his wives. That was why there were robot maids, instead of normal ones like in the palace. All right, I will bring him and his assistant there at 9 in the morning. Sure. Broly hanged up the phone call. Wait, did he say him and his assistant? Why would his assistant be there for an apology? Whatever, maybe he had some other business with me. Broly continued training without bothering with that thought anymore. The next day, Broly sat on his throne, resting his face on his fist after sending an elvish general away. The general had requested for his squad to be there when they conquered a planet for the Myrmidons. Obviously, he wanted to make some contribution and hoped to be promoted. That was why he already requested it, even though the Myrmidons aren't even here yet. The early bird gets the worm. He was the only one yet, since the others were apprehensive of conquering a planet even if there weren't any civilizations. After all, they were on the receiving side not long ago. The gigantic throne door was slowly opened, and a maid let 2 individuals inside. Broly's eyes constricted after seeing a maid open the door. Normally a guard would open it, and he also couldn't see any guard in front of the room. Although it looked like this Krino guy he had met when he visited the Galactic King, he instantly knew that only the appearance was the same. The life force and key signature were different, even though it seemed to be somewhat masked. Besides, this one seemed to be able to use magic as it was the most prominent energy inside his body. His assistant was the same, and this was something no one in the Galactic Patrol had. He saw right through them the moment he saw them. Krino didn't leave behind much of an impression, but it was still too easy for him to notice something was wrong. He silently looked at them slowly approach him. After they advanced right in front of the stairs of the throne, Krino seemed to kneel down, but before his knee touched the ground, the assistant opened her mouth to a frightening degree, showing off her fangs. In an instant, green liquid spewed out of her mouth directly at Broly, who leisurely created a key sphere blocking the liquid in the air. Meanwhile, the assistant's black eyes suddenly glowed white. A mental attack. Without being able to react to the sneak attack, Broly's mind was stunned for a fraction of a millisecond. However, this was enough for Krino to make his move. The key sphere had shattered after losing his focus and coming into contact with the liquid. In this split second, Krino arrived in front of Broly and placed his hand on his chest. Rip. A ripping sound, like a muscle was torn apart, sounded out in his chest. Broly stabilized his mind and punched out. It landed squarely in the stomach of Krino. Like a cannonball, his body shot through the air, directly into the wall next to the door. Broly quickly stood up and wanted to make a move, but he lost balance and fell on his knee. Blurg. Broly spewed out blood as he clenched his chest with his hand. Cough. Cough. I didn't expect for you to recover from Sina's attack so quickly. You must have some exceptional mental strength. Good thing, we don't play around. Ha ha ha. The disguise of Saiyan flickered out like a broken hologram, revealing his thin blue skin and the horn on his forehead. Let me introduce myself. I am Sin, an assassin, if you didn't notice. Oh man, your punch hurt. Broly slowly looked up. His cold gaze pierced Sin. Oh, scary. What are going to do now? Cough. Your heart muscle is already torn apart, and it won't take long until you die. Sina was looking at Broly like he was already dead. Just finish it and leave. Sina said coldly. Sure. Sin walked towards the crouching Broly. Broly looked at the ground before closing his eyes. He thought about what happened just a moment ago. The assistant used some kind of corrosive magic attack. While he was dealing with that attack, she followed up with a soul attack that was entirely focused on disrupting one's mind. In that moment, Saiyan had already closed the distance and used his ability, which caused his own life force to turn against him, directly bursting the cells in his heart. This ambush alone used 3 different powers in a single moment to completely throw off the opponent. Those energies weren't something just any hillbillies can use. In fact, those powers were rarities in the universe, and someone who can effectively use them together in a single attack was even rarer. He was too careless. He knew that something was wrong but was still caught off guard. If he had taken the initiative, he would have eliminated them easily. Sun bent down and tried to put his hand on Broly's head, but Broly suddenly stood up while causally using his hand to push Sen's away. Sen's eyes widened. He quickly thrusted his hand forward, directly placing his hand on Broly's chest like he did before. He started grinning before his face froze. Broly grasped Sen's wrists and twisted it to the sides, making Sen kneel down in pain. Arg! How? Your heart? Arg! Sen's agonizing scream sounded out in the throne room. Sina was shocked as she saw this. She knew better than anyone that once someone touches Sen, their only fate that awaited them would be death. Broly's deep calm voice resounded out. His voice seemed to withhold the boiling rage inside him. I am going to bathe this place in your blood. His shout was accompanied with a terrifying force that cracked open the ground. The windows instantly shattered into thousands of pieces as the whole room was filled in a green light, blinding Saiyan and Sina. The moment they were able to see again, a 2.5 figure stared at them with unhidden and pure killing intent seething out of his body. His hair slightly glowed green and lightning appeared around him. I tell you who send us.
Sen stuttered.
After hearing that, Broly raised him in front of him by his arm. I will dash. Broly put his other arm on his shoulder and started to pull his arm and shoulder in opposite directions. The muscles in Sen's arm were slowly tearing apart, fiber by fiber. The agonizing screams filled the hall and extended out into the city for everyone to hear. Sina stared at how Broly cruelly ripped Sen's arm off. She started backing off unconsciously. Her mind was in utter chaos. She couldn't understand what was happening. In one moment, Broly looked like he was about to die. In the next, he had transformed to a terrifying monster. Sina was completely terrified, but her long time as an assassin had tempered her mind. She quickly backed away before turning around, going into a full sprint. As soon as she did, she bumped into a wall, completely blanking her mind. A wall? She looked at the abs she had crashed into. She slowly looked up as cold sweat was running down her back. She looked at the face in front of her, who was holding a miserable-looking Saiyan. Where do you think you are going?
I sina ås trembling hävili.
Tears started to appear on her face. She stumbled backwards as she was losing herself to fear. Don't worry. I will take my time. Dozens of minutes passed with screams and snapping sounds coming out of the throne room. Chapter 106. House Moving. Broly looked at the hall and its door. The whole construct was made out of tremendous amount of spiritual energy with only a bit of magic mixed inside. The energy was constantly flowing around the construct, which also explained why it wasn't destroyed or pushed backwards by his attack earlier. The flow of energy pushed the energy of his attack around itself. If a blast hit it, the blast would be immediately broken up and dispersed to the sides. His vision had changed again. It was similar to when he absorbed the Origin's energy crystal. He was now able to see spiritual energy. He was certainly surprised by this find, but what shocked him was not the new energy that he could now see, but these flickers. There were light particles everywhere, flickering in and out of existence while being connected to each other, like a net covering all of existence. They seemed to move while not changing their position at all. He had never seen anything like this before, but he immediately knew what this net and its movement symbolizes. It was space being moved by time. Time and space itself. He looked inside, at the crystal again. He saw how the crystal was repelling space and time. He instantly knew that he wouldn't be able to teleport it away. By teleporting, he would need to use space to instantly travel through it. As for the construct, he wouldn't be able to move it either. He would need to far exceed the energy that was used to create this construct to teleport or even move it. Let's go. There isn't anything we can do now, he said to the others. The others nodded before teleporting away. He looked at the construct that was still moving like it was still in the planet. It seemed like the magic inside made it so it would stay synced with the now destroyed planet. Either way, it wasn't something for him to be concerned about. He closed the door and vanished from the spot. 1 month later, back on the Saiyans' new planet, Broly was hovering cross-legged in his training room. He focused on the spiritual energy inside as he moved it according to the technique. he was trying to master. After he had come back, he had noticed that every technique that used mental strength were growing stronger. He now knew that it wasn't really mental strength but the power one could push out of one's soul. For now, his abilities like telepathy, telekinesis, or aura was increased significantly. Although they weren't abilities that were as destructive as normal ki attacks, but most races wouldn't be able to sense this energy. It would be a good method to distract one's enemies, especially the technique that Zangya gained after she absorbed the crystal. Broly was now able to use it as well, and with much greater results too. His overall soul strength far exceeded the others, so it wasn't surprising that his abilities would be stronger as well. But what will help him in the future significantly would be the technique that he had trained for almost a month, and now he finally mastered it. Broly opened his eyes and slowly placed his feet on the ground. He deeply breathed in and out and started to walk outside. It was time for him to take actions before it was too late. Zangya, Kana, and Aaliyah waited for him outside. Kana and Zangya smiled mischievously at him. She had taken up some naughty habits from Kana. They wanted to throw herself at him, since it was late already, and they usually spend some quality time with each other now, but this time he stopped them. I am going out for some time. Aaliyah, you are now in charge for the time I am away. Send messages to the races from Perditus and announce that we are going public soon. They should be aware that the sooner they come the greater their benefits are. You are leaving? How long will you be away? Not sure yet, maybe only a week or a few months. He gave each a kiss before heading out of his ship and towards a house near the center of the small city that was created already. Without knocking, he went inside and saw how Raditz and Jine were eating their evening meal together. Are you prepared? Broly asked, and the two instantly knew what he meant. Yes. I have already put one of my good friends in charge in the valley. Jine almost screamed as she shot up. Raditz nodded as he stood up as well and walked towards Broly. Broly crouched and placed his hand on the ground in the living room. Raditz and Jine placed their hand on his shoulder. One moment later, the whole house disappeared from the city, from this planet. On Earth, near some mountains but still not far away from the city, a house suddenly popped into existence. Obviously, this house was the building from Raditz and Jine. They walked outside and Jine shot into the air. High in the sky, Jine took a deep breath. This planet looks and smells wonderful. Raditz smiled wryly on the side. Although what his mother said was true, he didn't really have too fond memories of it. He was ashamed of what he did, but now he was here to reconcile with his brother. Broly flew up next to them. Remember, you W-. Yes, we were able to escape from you and your kingdom by relying on Aaliyah. Raditz interrupted. Broly, thank you so much. You don't know how much this means to me. Jine turned around and said as she grasped his hands. Broly smiled. They have known each other for his entire life in this universe. He was happy that she is able to see Kakarot again. Here, this is the technique on how to teleport. You are always welcome on my planet. This is all I can do for you now. If he accepts you now, is in your hands alone. Don't mess it up. Broly gave them a small tablet before he teleported into space to a certain spaceship. Jine and Raditz were flying towards the ocean. There was a small island in the water with a singular house on it. It had pink walls with a red roof. On the front side of the house were red letters that spelled Came House. They landed on the sand just in front of the front door. There was some movement inside until a few figures came outside. Some were watching out from the window. They were cautious, especially after seeing who landed outside. Raditz, how are you still alive? A small bald guy without a nose shouted out. Raditz stayed quiet as he looked at his brother. He took a deep and stepped forward. Kakarot narrowed his eyes. He was confident that he would easily be able to defeat him, but he had a strange feeling as he looked at the woman at the side, who was watching him the whole time with teary eyes. Raditz went on his knees and pressed his forehead on the sandy ground. I apologize for everything I did. I am truly and deeply sorry. I was just too arrogant and just didn't know better. The others were shocked at the display that this once arrogant Saiyan showed them. Ahem. Stand up. I never hold a grudge against you. We fought it out and everything is now good between us. Kakarot rubbed the back of his head. Goku, how can you just forgive him? A woman with blue hair screamed out from the window. He even let that Vegeta scumbag live. So what surprise is it that he just forgives his brother? The bald midget retorted. So, who is she? Kakarot said as he pointed at Jine. Raditz stood up and smiled bitterly. She is our mother. EHHH? Everyone screamed out as they heard that, except for Kakarot as he quietly looked at Jine. My mother? As soon as Jine heard that, she walked towards him and quietly hugged him. The other looked at her with caution, but Jine just ignored them. She didn't say anything until she couldn't take it anymore. She broke out in tears as she tightly held her youngest son. Chapter 117. Starting with a bang. 5 spaceships were speeding further into the Andromeda Galaxy, heading straight for a planet in a binary star system. On the spaceship was the same big alpha symbol. These spaceships were of course Broly and the other powerhouses of Exausia with their elite squad. Broly was watching out of his window, watching at the 2 stars in the distance. It wouldn't take long until they would reach this star system. There was the meeting location between Mamba and Saiyan and Sina. Suddenly there was a ringing tone, indicating incoming information. Broly instantly knew it was the data he had requested a few days ago. Coolers and his own forces had already been here for a few months and of course had already made connections to their respectively sides of the galactic community. They were to send him any information about Mamba's forces. As soon as he got the information, he sent Aaliyah, Taro and Zangya, Kana in 2 teams towards Exauge's forces that had already made contact to this galaxy's version of the Galactic Patrol. After getting the order, the other spaceships simply disappeared from space, only to emerge again hundreds of light years away. They would assist them in destroying Mamba's camps all around this galaxy. Of course, considering that Mamba sent assassins for his head, he knew that Mamba would most likely plant some traps in these camps or sent more assassins. That was the reason why he sent them in teams of 2, so they could support each other if needed. As for Cooler's forces, they were excluded in engaging Mamba's forces. He needed Cooler to contact Mamba himself. He ordered Cooler to seemingly friendly approach Mamba so he could lure him somewhere. If Broly knew on which planet Mamba was, his fate would be a sealed deal. Obviously, he didn't only rely on Cooler for getting to Mamba, but would also make personal investigations. With his ability to influence someone's soul and magic techniques that could confuse a mind, he could force any information that he wanted out of someone. After giving his orders, he and his spaceship disappeared from sight, only to appear a few hundred kilometers above the target planet. The spaceship hovered in the air without moving until a section on the side of the outer wall opened and extended a staircase. It looked like the spaceship had landed on an invisible platform. Broly stepped out of his spaceship onto the stairs. He looked down at the 12 fast-approaching figures that were flying towards him. It didn't take them long to arrive. They pointed their armed cannons at Broly before they started to mock and laugh at him. "Another one of you Exauge bastards. What do you think you are doing here, asshole? This is Mamba's territory. Hee hee. You should quickly run away before we are going to kill you." Broly looked at them coldly, which made them unconsciously shiver. "I don't like your expression. Do you want to fucking die? I will murder your ass if you don't fuck off right now." Another one of these snake-like humanoids shouted out. Broly grinningly pointed at him and gestured with his finger to come at him. "Come, try your luck. Let's see how this will go for you." Hee hee. Although Broly was laughing, his eyes didn't show any kindness or goodwill. The temperature seemed to drop drastically for those goons. They knew that Exauge's forces were somewhat formidable from the news Cooler's force conveyed, but many were not convinced that they would amount to anything in their territory. They thought the people in the Milky Way galaxy were inferior to them, but they still didn't want to attack rashly. Their superiors had told them to not engage them needlessly, which made them a bit apprehensive. Instead, they tried to intimidate Broly off this planet. Of course, they didn't know with whom they were dealing with. A moment of silence suffused the surroundings until a whooshing sound appeared from beneath them. They looked down and saw a bull-like figure approach them fast. "Commander!" The goons called out before chuckling like fools that had finally found their backup. The commander snorted at their shout. "You idiots, are you messing around again?" He saw the symbol on the ship on the side, which made him frown a bit. "Since someone with a higher rank had shown up, I don't need you anymore," Broly said to the goons and waved his arms like he was swatting away a fly. "You do you think yo dash?" Before one of them could finish his sentence, his body like the rest split apart in numerous sections. Afterwards their bodies seemed to explode, incinerating the pieces of body that scattered in the air. The bull-like commander widened his eyes in shock. He didn't even notice how he attacked. "This is bad." He immediately came to the decisions to flee. Although he was confident in his abilities, he knew that he would be no match for this person. He tried to flee, but he couldn't move at all. It was like an invisible force had surrounded his body. Suddenly a shadow covered his face and a hand started gripped his head. An increasing pressure appeared on his head, like something would crush his skull in the next moment. "I need some information, and you are going to tell me everything I want to know." Broly saw the fear in the bull's eyes, but the bull couldn't say anything. He was solidified. He could only beg with his eyes. "Hee hee. Don't worry, this will only be unbearably painful." Broly sat in his spaceship again further away from the binary star system. He looked through window at the 2 distant stars and the planets surrounding it before disappearing. He emerged again not far from the planet he was a few hours ago. He looked down and saw countless little beings moving around in panic like ants. He pointed his finger upwards. A green flame-like sphere started growing above his finger. It started growing until it reached 30 meters across. The sphere then started to become smaller again, condensing into a much smaller version of itself until it reached that of a pearl. "What can I say? I would love to start this vengeance with a bang." After saying that, he pointed his finger at the planet. The pearl shot through the air. Broly quickly disappeared, only to arrive at his spaceship again, just in time to see a grand explosion on the planet. The whole planet was quickly consumed by the explosion, but it didn't stop there. The explosion expanded rapidly. The shockwave pushed the other planets in the system out of their orbit. Some started breaking under the tremendous force. The two stars in the system were affected as well. One of them started drifting towards the other. It didn't take long until the two collided and brightened up the whole system, destroying everything in the near surroundings. Broly could feel the massive amount of energy the two stars were giving off as he fended it off to protect his ship. He looked at the massive explosion which devastated every planet in front of him. He now somewhat understood why Frieza enjoyed this firework. It was indeed a beautiful sight. He easily destroyed a planet and steered the whole star system into chaos with a simple attack of his that didn't even take him 10 seconds to make. That was also a reason why he focused so arduously to master his control. Sure, a casual punch of his could easily destroy a mountain or worse, but the more he was able to concentrate this power into a single point, the more harmful it would be against his opponents. That was especially true in his higher forms, which was also reason why he wished for the necklace to help suppress most of his power. He set course to another planet where another camp of Mamba was. It would take a few days, so without further thought he went inside his training room. He wanted to use the time to get used to his ascended legendary state. He didn't know how strong Mamba was, but Broly wouldn't underestimate him. He wanted to be in top form when he meets him. Until then he would carry out his vendetta by demolishing and killing every camp and subordinate he came across. Besides, this was a good way to kill some time until the androids attacked. Chapter 118. 4 Emperors. My lord, another camp in the West Quadrant was destroyed. This is the 42nd location we have placed on different planets. We are only left with 7 camps near the center. Muo's has already become braver and tried to annex a few of the planets Xiaoju's force had conquered, but they seem to have suffered severe losses as well against them. Clink. A glass fell to the ground and shattered as toxic green liquid started to flow out and corrode the ground.
Bang!
A tail smashed on the ground, immediately cracking the ground. What are our losses? In the west and north side, only 10% survived while we lost all our planets to them. We lost everyone. Where he showed up, he had blown up the planets as usual. That fool. He gains nothing if he simply eradicates everyone and everything. It is not profitable. Unless, maybe he is after reputation? He is a newcomer after all. My lord, maybe we should see Cooler the Frost Demon. We have a common enemy after all. The lord stood in front of a window, facing into the seemingly empty space. The lord had a tall and muscular upper body with razor-sharp claws on his long arms. His upper body ended in a long snake-like tail. Most prominent that was even noticeable from behind was the wide neck. The lord turned around looking at his subordinate, who was gulping after seeing the neon green eyes of his lord. It seemed like the mere gaze would be toxic. His tongue would slither out from time to time. The lord looked like a king cobra with a somewhat human upper body. Ally myself with Cooler? It is obvious that the two are working together. Working together? But I thought they were nemesis, which was why they chased each other even till here. Do I only have dumbass as subordinates? The subordinate shivered after hearing the question. They have never truly fought. With this they had an excuse to expand their territory. Only now that Xiaoju's king was attacked, they suddenly show their fangs. Even if they weren't working together, I don't know anything more in depth about Cooler. It would be foolish of me to work with him. They think because they are somewhat formidable, they can just mess around. Even their king has moved out personally. What a fool. Who sends their leader to the front lines? Hiss. As Mamba hissed and sprayed a bright green liquid on the ground, quickly destroying the reinforced metal ground. I will make you regret for your actions. His face distorted in anger before relaxing again, showing a cold, calculating smile. Deep in the Andromeda Galaxy, a ship was steadily flying through the empty space. Inside were 4 people standing behind a sitting figure, who looked at the report. Two teams had gathered. These were of course Broly and the other S-fighters. Everything points to planet CB-232, being their headquarters, and where Mamba is currently residing. For almost a month, no news about anything indicating his current position, and suddenly numerous signs pointing at this planet. I don't even think someone like him would choose a stationary location as his residence. Considering how careful he is, it wouldn't surprise me if there are only a handful that knows his location while he is moving all around. King Broly, we have to conclude our vendetta soon. The other forces in this galaxy become more anxious the longer we stay. We have seen an increased number of their forces where we were operating. And I mean both sides of this galaxy. Aaliyah added. They have somewhat tolerated their invasion as attempt on the Saiyan King's life was made, but after Broly was going around destroying entire planets, or even solar systems, they became more displeased. After all, every planet was a potential trading route, even if it was owned by a murderous king. At least he had put some value to those planets. To begin with, there aren't many planets in a galaxy, which conditions were suitable for beings to be on. They couldn't tolerate his behavior, be it criminal or righteous organizations. The only thing that they overestimated was the care Broly would give to their threats. The average Saiyan was able to swagger around in this galaxy even without Broly's or another Super Saiyan support. Even 2 mercenary goons in the upper 90s on the ranking list were easily disposed of by Broly. He couldn't care less about the opinion of some weaklings, but he was on time pressure as well. There wasn't much time until the androids attacked, and Broly wanted a first seat on these events. We won't change anything. We will work them off like we planned it. Since there are only a few planets left, they have probably placed some traps on all of them. It doesn't matter which planet we attack by now, we will just do according to our terms. Oh, and before you land on the planets, just try to blow them up immediately. You don't enter, just carry out attacks from the distance. If there is more resistance than expected, report it to me without delay. Understood. Short afterwards, the four left and headed towards their respective planet in teams of 2. Broly stroked his chin. He couldn't help but feel somewhat threatened by the incoming battle, which in turn only made him more excited. In the near center of the Andromeda Galaxy, a Red Bull, like humanoid, was sitting on a table with 2 other individuals besides Mamba. He listened to the Cobra to the side with his arms crossed. He had a golden nose ring, and his face, as well as his whole muscle-bulging body, was covered in scars. His name was Angus, and seemed to be on the verge of flipping the table. On another chair was a slim black-bluish octopus with 2 dark yellow eyes. From time to time it would throw in some remarks seemingly telepathic, as it didn't seem to have a mouth to speak from. The octopus was named Crake, and was releasing a special pressure that made one uncomfortable just by being in the same room. Weaker wild individuals would most likely lose their minds. The last one was a blue figure which seemed to be entirely made out of lightning. It cruised through the whole body, and every time he spoke it was accompanied with a thunder. Everything he touched would start smoking shortly after. It didn't seem like it had its own power fully under control. He was Muos. They all had different powers, and were from a different race. They had known each other for a very long time, but this didn't mean that they were any closer of being friends. The opposite was true. These 4 were the current rulers of the underground, the emperors of the Andromeda Galaxy. They were the ones that wanted to be at each other's throats like no one else, but a new threat had wandered inside their territory and destroyed the balance. Although they were happy to see Mamba's influence decline, they couldn't accept someone that would act without care. This would doom not only Mamba's, but their business as well. Broly was like a crazy person, not even one of the worst criminals wanted to deal with, but now that he had come here to mess around, they couldn't just ignore his existence. His feats already spoke for themselves. Although everyone here was formidable beings, they wouldn't want to take this opponent lightly. Their long life had made them cautious of beings with weird abilities. It was obvious that this Mad King Broly had showed off a small part of his powers already, making the other side more cautious. They thought it was to provoke them or intimidate him, and to some degree it worked. Not out of fear, but they wanted to make the next battle a sure kill. They have lived for many years, and knew to make compromises under this new threat. In the first time in history of their reign, these 4 emperors made an alliance to fend off a greater evil than themselves. They discussed for a while, or rather Mamba explained his plan to them on their next move. This sounds rather simple? Angus frowned as he said that. He was one who simply used his physical strength to reign supreme, but even he knew that the proposed plan sounded a bit too simple. Humph. The simpler the less something can go wrong. Just follow the plan. Chapter 119. Fight begins. After a few days passed, Broly and his crew had eliminated the last 7 encampments of Mamba's force. Only Mamba's so-called headquarters remained. It was a planet very close to the center of the Andromeda Galaxy. They were only a few hours away from the planet. They sat in their spaceship looking through the window at the planet. The other 40 elites were already brought back to Exausia. In the incoming fight, they would only be a distraction. This wasn't something they could participate in. After meditating a bit, getting into top form, they parked their spaceship in another solar system. Afterwards, they teleported to a few hundred kilometers away from the planet. As soon as they did, they were able to see movement on the planet's surface. It didn't take long for a few hundred aliens of different races to approach Broly's group. They didn't hesitate and released several key blasts. It was clear that the group which approached them were the very elites of Mamba, but in front of the powerhouses of Exausia, they were only considered slightly bigger ants. A few seconds was all the time they needed to wipe them out. Not waiting for them to start attacking the planet, 3 figures surrounded in domineering auras shot towards them. Broly squinted his eyes as he looked at the figures that were flying towards them. The figure among the trio that attracted his attention first was of course Mamba, a humanoid cobra. He wasn't easily confused with someone else, especially with the key he was leaking. 2 others were on his side, seemingly of equal standings. Broly looked at the 2, a Red Bull and a being made out of lightning. Since they seemed of equal standings as Mamba, he associated them with the 2 ranked beings that reigned in this galaxy as well. Muos, Emperor of Lightning, ranked 49, and Angus, the Mad Bull, ranked 59. He instantly assigned the others to take on the bull. He wasn't sure if they were able to handle Mamba, not even considering the even stronger Muos. He only needed them to delay him for a bit, until he had eradicated the other 2. Instead of instantly attacking, the trio started hovering in space in front of them. "You have finally come, Exausia's lord, King Broly," Mamba said while slightly hissing. He didn't hide his anger and disdain for Broly. "Did you write your will?" Broly said mockingly. Humph. It was a terrible mistake to mess with my empire. I will make you suffer. Mamba suddenly charged out with Maus and Angus in tow. Without hesitation, Aaliyah, Kana, and Taro transformed into ascended Super Saiyans while Zangya transformed into her full power state as well. Broly's eyes started changing into a yellow color as he used his Akari transformation. Golden and green lights brightened the dark space on one side, while blue, green, and red lights shone on the other side. The three emperors were slightly surprised by the huge increase of their strength. This wasn't a level many beings in the entire universe could reach. No matter what, they were still more than confident enough to deal with them. Broly's crew instantly intercepted Angus, pushing him out of the range of Broly and the other two. Angus straight up rushed at Zangya and punched out. A domineering pressure came along with his punch, as it seemed to be able to crush anything. Zangya narrowly escaped the attack by teleporting behind Angus, but the punch's power seemed to press forwards as it headed to Taro a few hundred meters away. Taro instantly released tremendous ki, forming it into a ki barrier surrounding his body, while Kana and Aaliyah gathered ki in their hands. On impact, Taro's body was slightly pushed backwards, but he had sustained no injuries. Aaliyah and Kana finished building up their attacks. As soon as they did, they released their attack at the same time. In an instant, the ki waves reached Angus, who only snorted after seeing the attacks. Their attacks immediately exploded on impact, completely enveloping Angus' body. They weren't able to see him at all. They waited until the explosion cleared to see how much damage that attack had dealt. The explosion cleared and a 5-meter-tall bull with bulging muscles hovered silently in space as he looked at them with a mocking expression. Veins all over decorated his body. His strength seemed to have increased a couple of times, and he didn't have a single injury on him. Your pathetic attacks can't even scratch me, let alone injure me. He looked at them intimidatingly, but he only received smiles and even sighs of relief as response. A vein on his forehead started appearing as he looked at them with rage. What are you smirking about? I will crush and grind your bones to dust. Angus dashed out and quickly arrived in front of Taro. He chopped down right at Taro's head. If that attack hit, Taro wouldn't only receive a small injury. Taro didn't panic as he evaded the attack by slightly moving out of place and released dozens of counterattacks in an instant. A giant with an incredible high defense and high attack power? Nothing new. But you're even slower than him by a long shot. You clump of muscles, Taro taunted. But he didn't continue his attack as he dodged the arm's swipe from Angus. In the next moment, Angus was bombarded with attacks from the distance. Before he was hit, pulse-like ki waves blocked the incoming attacks, neutralizing any damage it would have done. Although he had a high defense, even weaker attacks would accumulate damage on his body over time. He wanted to quickly rush out and crush one to ease the pressure, but before he could move out again, Aaliyah appeared behind him and gave a hard kick to his back head. It only slightly nudged forwards. Angus quickly reached out for the leg, but couldn't catch it in time as Aaliyah sprung backwards. Seamless, ki waves headed at Angus, but this time he brazed through the attacks. His hand thrusted out of the explosion and reached out for Aaliyah, but she fired a ki blast, pushing herself far away. You bunch of flies, if I get you in my hands, I will crush you. The others didn't even respond as they proceeded to mix up ranged with close attacks. While the others were slowly whittling away Angus' power, Broly was pushed back by the two emperors. Maus was incredibly fast. Although the attacks didn't do much damage, his lighting had a numbing effect on the spot it hit. On the other hand, Mamba's body had a natural toxic component to it. If Broly touched his skin, he felt how his cells were slowly being destroyed. Even his ki waves were mixed with magic and seemed to have a toxic or corroding feature to it as well. Broly didn't want to block his attack with his body. An incredible fast opponent and toxic attacks were reasons why he was pushed slightly backwards, but he didn't want to show all his cards yet as he tried to gauge their full strength. Broly dodged over a tail sweep from Mamba and a lightning fist shot right at his face. Broly opened his mouth wide, and in an instant a ki sphere appeared before bursting open in a bright light beam. Maus instantly tried to dodge the attack from point blank. Although he was fast, he was still grazed by it. A piece of his lightning shoulder was ripped out, but it was quickly regenerated and reformed with more lightning. While Broly attacked, Mamba slithered towards Broly with his fangs out. He aimed straight at his neck, but only a dozen centimeters away, Broly tilted his body slightly forwards and to the side, while striking Mamba with his elbow. The elbow tip directly hit Mamba's nose and cut his face. Mamba was pushed backwards and Maus quickly arrived next to him. Mamba's face grimaced as he still couldn't gain an advantage against Broly even with Maus in tow. Mamba's body suddenly leaked a tremendous amount of power. His 10-meter-long body started shining in a white light before disappearing as quickly as it appeared. Mamba had transformed into a humanoid being with 2 legs and arms. His hands still had sharp claws, and his new feet had them as well. His whole body was covered in dark green scales with black spots on it. He had shrunk to 2.5 meters height and was releasing a scary power. It was like his mere presence would corrode one's body. Mao's on the side wasn't inactive as his body's lightning changed from his light blue to a bright blood red. His body was giving off dangerous wipes. Anyone would feel like a calamity was about to descend on them when they saw Mao's. You actually pushed us this far. Be proud to die after seeing this. Mamba hissed out as he mockingly pointed at Broly. You took the words right out of my mouth. Broly sneered as his body was rapidly increasing in size, only stopping after his frame reached 3 meters. His body was giving off an overbearing pressure that descended on anything near him. Broly released an aura which triggered the primal fear of a predator in the two emperors. Mamba gritted his teeth and shook his head to get rid of this feeling. In the next moment he dashed out again. Chapter 120. Fight continues. Mamba dashed out and in just a blink of an eye, he appeared in front of Broly and slashed at Broly's throat. The space seemed to tear apart. The claw created dark green light beams as it immediately appeared at Broly's throat. Broly only smirked as he slightly leaned back for a few centimeters, effectively evading the attack. As Broly evaded, his arm stabbed at Mamba's side. Just as his attack was about to reach him, a red light intercepted his attack, slowing him down for just a moment, but long enough for Mamba to retreat. Broly looked at Mao's who had his hand stretched out, his fingers pointing at Broly. Mao's didn't wait for Broly as his fingers started glowing in an intense red until 5 beams shot out. Broly flew to the side and easily evaded the attacks. What Broly didn't expect was that the beams were following him closely as Mao's followed him with his palm. They were fast, and as they pursued him, Broly turned around, facing the closely following beams. He stretched out his palms prepared to shoot Ki Blast at the approaching beams as he flew backwards. He already noticed that Mamba was approaching him from the back. A second later, just as Mamba was about to slash out, Broly stopped and shot several Ki Blasts at the beams. Before they collided with the beams, they exploded. A giant explosion was created and enveloped Broly, who quickly dashed inside the explosion. Mamba was about to head inside as well. Just as he was about to enter the explosion, 5 red beams shot out of the explosion. They were too fast for Mamba to dodge at this close range. He brought his arms in front of his body, blocking the beams. 5 holes appeared in his arms. Mamba was bleeding green blood. His face distorted as he shot a glance at Mao's, who only frowned slightly. They waited for the explosion to clear. After a while, everything cleared but no figure was in sight. Arg! Mao's body shot out and headed towards a planet not far away. He quickly stopped before he reached the planet. A green hole was burned in his abdomen. He wanted to heal, but he realized that the green energy that lingered at the wound slowed down the process and raised the expenditure of energy to heal. He seemed to notice something. He quickly looked up and saw a fast-approaching figure, not even 100 meters away. The wound slowed him down. Without being able to react, a fist landed straight in his face. He was shot away right at the planet. Like a meteor, he pulverized a small mountain and created a giant crater on the ground. Broly didn't follow up as he looked at the planet with a smirk. Mamba suddenly appeared behind him and chopped down, right at Broly's head. Broly took a step back and reached out with his arms, catching Mamba's arm. Broly bent forwards as he threw Mamba over his head. Mamba quickly hurled at the planet, but quickly regained his balance. Mamba stopped and looked upwards at the hovering Broly, but the only thing he saw was a Ki sphere. The Ki sphere exploded right in his face and launched Mamba out of the sky to the ground, creating a crater as well. Broly calmly landed on the ground as he looked at the 2 craters. He saw the 2 figures move, trying to get up. Without waiting for them to get up, Broly jumped up and shot to the ground again. He heavily landed on Mao's back. Mao's back was bent on impact. He looked like he was about to snap in half any moment. Broly jumped and shot to the ground again. Mao's quickly fled after feeling Broly get off his back, but this time he wasn't the target. Mamba was supporting himself with his hands. Just as he was about to stand up, he felt a brunt force knocking his face into the ground. Broly jumped away again and hovered in the air. Broly looked at the giant crater he created with Mamba's face. He slightly tilted his head to the sides, several times as beams shot past his head. This time they didn't follow him as they destroyed mountains in the back. Broly looked back at Mao's whose lights seemed to have dimmed by quite a bit. Broly grinned as he raised his arm. Mao's lightning flickered. In the next moment Mao's started fleeing into the sky. Green light beams followed him. He tried to shake them off, but like his attack, they pursued him relentlessly. Unlike him, however, Broly didn't need to concentrate a whole lot to do this. Broly looked back at the hole, which started to shine in a dark green light. A figure stormed outside of the hole. Mamba's appearance had slightly changed. He became smaller again, reaching a height of 2 meters, and was now completely dark green. But what stood out was long claws that dripped green liquid. The drops instantly corroded the ground. Mamba slashed his arms and green blade beams tore through the air. Broly's eyes constricted as he saw tiny drops filling up the gaps of the slashes. Broly dodged to the sides way out of range of this attack. Theseus' attacks that only had a straight flight path wouldn't be able to reach him. Without warning, loud booms sounded out a few thousand kilometers away, brightening up the sky in a green hue. Broly only smirked as he dashed at Mamba again. Mamba continued to slash out, but to no avail. Broly was too fast. Broly arrived in front of him and punched out, landing straight on his stomach, sending him flying. Mamba's body bounced numerous times over the ground until he crashed into a mountain, completely obliterating it. Broly frowned as he looked at his fist, seeing his energy depleting rapidly as it fought off the corrosion. Out of the mountain, Mamba's sorry figure flew out quickly, escaping into space. Mamba's mouth was covered in green blood, dripping onto his chest. Mamba looked back at Broly, who was grinning at him. Mamba couldn't help but shiver at the sight. What a monster! Mamba mumbled as he escaped into space. You can try to run if you want, but I'll hunt you down to the very ends of the universe. Broly's deep voice sounded out. Mamba couldn't help but tremble in fear, but he quickly calmed down as he started grinning with a mad glint in his eyes. That's what I am hoping for. This will be the end for you, Broly, Mamba thought as he headed into the empty space. He was quickly followed by a black light. Mao's appeared beside Mamba, who widened his eyes as he let his eyes wander over Mao's body. His whole body was filled with black lightning, which exuded a sense of destruction. A few black lightnings shot out of his body, which easily tore apart space. Mamba started frowning. He had never seen that form of Mao's, even though they had fought numerous times in the past. No matter what, the stronger he was, the better. Mamba had already lost confidence to defeat Broly in battle, but that he didn't really care, as this wasn't the plan after all. They only need to fly for another minute, and then they would have reached it. Mamba and Mao's looked back and saw a green domineering aura rushing towards them. After seeing this, they quickly accelerated and blindly shot several attacks at Broly's direction. Broly didn't even bother to evade the attacks, as they wouldn't hit him anyway. Broly's eyes turned yellow for a second and instantly appeared in front of Mamba. Broly's leg swung at Mamba's head. Mamba was shocked at his sudden appearance and quickly tried to shield himself. He was only narrowly able to block it, but the force was still too heavy. Crack! One of his arms broke, and his other was numb from the impact. He was launched back. Mao's didn't stop to help him but continued to flee, but Broly didn't have any of it. He quickly pursued him, but he was surprised that Mao's was able to accelerate even further. Broly stacked Akari again on his legendary state, but even with this he wasn't able to catch up on him. In high-speed pursuit, Mao's suddenly disappeared and Broly looked shocked as he tried to stop, but a force seemed to strongly pull him closer to the spot Mao's disappeared just a moment ago. Broly's figure struggled to get away as he turned around, and his ki flared up. Strangely, 3 figures started to materialize a few thousand kilometers away, watching Broly struggle amusedly. Mamba wiped away the blood on his mouth with his still intact arm and started speaking. Broly, even with your might, you won't be able to escape this massive black hole. Ha ha ha. This is the end of your short reign, King Broly. Mamba raised his arm and shot out a ki blast straight at Broly.